Good afternoon to you. Happy Friday to you. In America today, we are turning the pages of what may be our next bestseller. And unfortunately, this one is not fiction. Instead, it is a 2,200-page report, 15 months in the making, laying out nothing short of a criminal case against Lehman Brothers, whose collapse, you'll remember, a major signpost in the financial meltdown that we have still not recovered from, nor have we reformed the system that created it in the first place almost 2 years in. I want you to think Enron, accounting fraud, except this time the entire U.S. economy was brought to the brink, in part by one firm that was cooking its books. Enron basically brought California's power structure to the brink. Lehman, along with the rest of the banks, brought our entire country and the global economy to the brink. How'd they do it? Well, using a method, a complex method. Remember, complexity is how Wall Street steals effectively. This was called a repo transaction. Simply put, a repo transaction is an agreement where one company transfers an asset to another company in exchange for short-term cash. Think of it like a pawn shop. But this exchange comes with the agreement that the borrower will pay back that cash and take back those assets, whatever they've pawned effectively, at a specific date. It's usually done within a week or so. If you just need a little short-term cash, you got something that's illiquid, you give it to the repo guy, he gives you some cash, you move on. It's like me asking Governor Spitzer, who coincidentally happens to be here today, nice to see you, Governor, to lend me, let's say, I don't know, $50 billion for, I don't know, my trash can that's actually not worth anything. Are you up for that?
For you, Dylan, anything. Right. $50 billion is nothing.
Here's a trash can. $10 billion piece. Thank you very much. So now I have my $50 billion, and I'm able to hide my trash can. Now, the governor doesn't care because he knows I'm going to pay back his $50 billion, and he's going to give me my trash can back in about a week. But while the bank regulators and Wall Street, while I have to file my quarterly report, I'm going to show them the $50 billion in cash. So while everybody's looking at my balance sheet, they see this, the $50 billion. Instead of the pile of troubled assets, or in my case, the garbage can. In Lehman's case, it helped them hide their debt, their garbage cans, from everyone while showing off their money, which allowed them to take more risk at Lehman Brothers and in the process pay themselves more money by perpetuating the fraud. This, of course, until the whole thing blew up. Now, keep in mind, when I talk about taking money, I really mean taking money. Lehman Brothers CEO Richard Fuld, for instance, paid himself with schemes like this $500 million in personal compensation during his tenure at the firm, according to the FT. Now, if you're running a nice accounting fraud like this, you could pay yourself a lot of money, too. Now, back to these repos. It's something, as I said, that's actually often done within the banking industry because they'll need short-term cash and they've got things that they can't liquidate immediately. But there was one key difference with the way Lehman did it. Instead of categorizing these transactions as a loan, as I just described with the governor, they described them publicly as a sale, never disclosing that they would ever have to pay back the $50 billion that they borrowed for those assets. That is not legal. And don't just take my word for it. The report, again, out of the 2,200 pages, this is a quote, Lehman's failure to disclose the use of an accounting device, this repo transaction, to significantly and temporarily lower leverage, that's their risk, at the same time that it affirmatively represented those low leverage numbers to investors as positive news, created a misleading portrayal of Lehman's true financial health. The result? Lehman wildly inflated the value of their company in the days before and after they issued their quarterly reports. In the last quarter of 2007, they hid $39 billion in troubled assets using this technique. In the first quarter of 2008, they hid nearly $49 billion. And then finally, in the second quarter of 2008, $50 billion. It was at the end of the next quarter when Citibank and J.P. Morgan called Lehman to pay up on all that money that the entire house of cards ultimately collapsed. And in some ways, you can't blame J.P. Morgan. They're like, you guys don't have the money. It's a fraud. We want our money. Down we go. It gets better. Are you ready? Emails show that Lehman CEO Richard Fuld and the company's 3 different CFOs, for some reason they seem to go through a few of them, were made aware that this fraud was happening and did nothing to stop it. And I'll quote, In May of 2008, a Lehman senior vice president by the name of Matt Lee wrote a letter to management alleging accounting improprieties, referencing these repo transactions, that Lehman used $50 billion of Repo 105 transactions to temporarily move assets off the balance sheet at quarter end, hiding the debt. In fact, each of the individuals we mentioned, the CFOs and Dick Fuld, are required by law to sign off on each of their quarterly reports. Not to mention, they're forced to sign off on each of their annual reports. Those reports classified these transactions not as loans, but as sales. That is fraud. Fuld, when interviewed for the report, denies it. The emails also show even Lehman's auditor, Ernst & Young, knew this was going on and did nothing about it. Quoting from the report, Ernst & Young took no steps to question or challenge the non-disclosure by Lehman of its use of $50 billion of temporary off-balance sheet transactions. Think Arthur Andersen and Enron. Somebody on the outside has to validate the fraud on the inside. The bottom line? While many Americans and many in our government would love for you to believe that the financial crisis and the transfer of wealth in this country was an accident, this report comes just short of suggesting this is by no means an accident, but instead one of the greatest crimes ever perpetrated against a group of people. This crime, an accounting fraud perpetrated by bank CEOs against the American taxpayer and enabled by the U.S. government. I want to bring in former New York Governor Eliot Spitzer, who was known as the Sheriff of Wall Street in his tenure as Attorney General. And Governor, it is a pleasure to have you back.
Thank you.
The question I think myself and so many others are asking is, in light of this, are we going to see handcuffs? Are we going to see a perp walk? Are we going to see some sort of criminality?
Well, look, first, it's still hard to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, based upon the evidence we've seen, that they committed a crime. Certainly, a prima facie case is there, as the report makes clear. There is evidence of civil and criminal misconduct. And I think we will see prosecutors looking very, very hard at this. And I think, in fact, there is no doubt civil cases will be brought. We had a failure, as you've pointed out, the CEO, the CFO, the accountants, and indeed the regulators, the Fed, and the Treasury that were inside these banks. And the question also has to be asked, where were they? So will there be cases? Almost without a doubt, there will now be cases. Whether it's civil or criminal will depend upon the quality of the evidence as we go forward.
Some people watching probably know this, some do not. The fact is, there is a precedent for this type of activity where people make money by hiding risk, whether it's these... Go ahead.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, what is most troubling about this, in a way, is that we went through Enron. We went through the AIG accounting scandals. We have had Arthur Andersen as an accounting firm driven out of business for participating in this. We passed Sarbanes-Oxley. We thought people believed and wanted to believe the lesson was clear, that schemes like this wouldn't be accepted. And yet here we are right back at the basis sort of deception. These transactions served one purpose only, that was to mislead the market. They served no economic purpose. This was razzle-dazzle to mislead. It shouldn't be permitted. So what do we have to do to stop it is the question people should be asking.
And, well, what is the answer?
I think handcuffs. And I think, unfortunately, only bringing criminal actions and saying to people this simply isn't tolerable any longer. And, look, you're not going to bring criminal actions against the failed regulators at Treasury and Fed, but that should really generate soul-searching. Who was running the New York Fed that had people inside this bank? Tim Geithner. Who was running the Fed? Ben Bernanke, when all this was going on. They should have known if they didn't.
Who would pursue those charges?
Well, the Southern District of the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan certainly could, or the Eastern District of Manhattan. State prosecutors theoretically could, but I would imagine, given where things are right now, the feds will take the lead on this, and certainly we should be seeing cases.
Two more quickly. The report suggests that other banks weren't using this transaction to hide risk. How would they know that, considering that the bailout would appear to make everything go away effectively?
Well, look, the report, which seems to be incredibly thorough, did go out of its way, in one sentence at least, to say other banks were not doing this. How they know that is a little mysterious to me, unless they've gone through all the other transactions at the other banks. Let's hope that's the case. But again, the most troubling thing about this is, how could this be going on such enormous numbers at such a critical moment after what we thought were lessons learned years ago?
Putting this in the context of the present, you've already steered our attention towards AIG Financial products along with a number of Frank Partnoy, and others.
Right.
So AIGFP, which we know Tim Geithner and others have the capacity to reveal those emails but have not.
Right.
And now we have these Lehman repo transactions. So those are the two best places to look, correct?
Look, if I could wish one thing as an investigative matter, release all the emails, release all the documents. Frank and I and Bill Black wrote an op-ed saying release all the AIG emails. Let us do an open source investigation. Let the public and every journalist parse through them and figure out what really happened. It's still behind a wall. Treasury, the Fed, they don't want us to see what happened. This report makes it eminently clear. We need to know.
Ultimately, do you believe the reason that Treasury and the Fed doesn't want us to see it is because they don't want to be exposed for their failure to supervise?
I hate to challenge the motive of people. I'd rather talk about fact, but I will tell you this. The picture is an ugly one, and Treasury and Fed had their hands in these companies, supervising them. People on the floor of these trading floors, what was going on that they did not know this? There may be purely innocent answers, but certainly we as a public now need to ask again, what happened?
Understood, Governor. It's always a pleasure if you stick around.
Do I get the money back?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
You know, I want this deal unwound. You know, I'm not going to
unwind the deal. I forgot. Sorry about that. I don't know what I was thinking.